So we're starting with a prayer from a book called Earth Prayers. It's a book full of prayers about the gift of creation that we've been given. And we all pray with me. O our Mother the Earth, blessed is your name. Blessed are your fields and forests, your rocks and mountains, your grasses and trees and flowers, and every green and growing thing. Blessed are your streams and lakes and rivers, the oceans where our life began, and all your waters that sustain our bodies and refresh our souls. Blessed is the air we breathe, your atmosphere that surrounds us and binds us to every living thing. Blessed are all creatures who walk along your surface or swim in your waters or fly through your air, for they are all our relatives. Blessed are all people who share this planet, for we are all one family, and the same Spirit moves through us all. Blessed is the sun, our day star, bringer of morning and the heat of summer, giver of light and life. Blessed is the moon, our night lamp, ruler of the tides, protector of all women, and guardian of our dreams. Blessed are the stars and planets, the timekeepers, who fill our nights with beauty and our hearts with awe. O great Spirit, whose voice we hear in the wind and whose face we see in the morning sun, blessed is your name. Help us to remember that you are everywhere and teach us the way of peace. Amen. So we'll be meandering through the creation story this morning. But before we start that, I had a little quiz for all of you. So I was wondering how many of you know that there are two creation stories in the book of Genesis?
Yep.
Do you know which one talks about, well, which one is in Genesis 1 and which one is in Genesis 2 and how they're different? That's a really advanced question. That might be too much for the beginning.
That's what you're here for.
That's what I'm here for, that's right. So we actually have two creation stories in the book of Genesis. The first one is in Genesis 1, the second one is in Genesis 2, and they're both poems. That's also something you may not have known, that in a lot of the Hebrew scriptures, the writing is in poetry. So for those of you who are poets or who love reading poetry, there's poetry in the Bible, especially in the creation story, which most people don't think about. So when we're looking at Genesis 2 today, but I encourage you to go back and look at Genesis 1 later and see how it differs, especially with the wording that's used to talk about people and the creation of people. But today we're talking about Genesis 2 and talking about the word Adamah and also the words for man and woman. We're talking about the words that we've been given to talk about who we are as people of this planet and who God is and what that says about our relationship to the earth. So the first word we're talking about today is the word human, but it comes from the word Adamah, which comes from the word dirt. So it actually means we are made of dirt, which doesn't sound very great at first hearing, right? That's not really the first thing we think of when we think of being made in the image of God, which is a phrase we often talk about. Sometimes people talk about being filled with the breath of God. That might be a familiar phrase to some of you. But what that means is that in that creation story, God breathed into a pile of dirt and created the first people. The cool thing about the word Adamah is that it's actually non-gendered. So that's also a little bit mind-blowing for some people too. That Adamah means, it's an androgynous word. It doesn't mean man or woman. It means that God created a human. So Adam and Eve aren't given those genders until later in the story, which is a really cool thing, I think. What it also tells us about our relationship with the earth too is that Adam and Eve are connected to one another. When we look at the Hebrew words for Adam and Eve, or man and woman, they're from the same root, so they couldn't be made without each other. So the cool thing about those words is that they need each other to be the words that they are. And those words could not be what they are if they had not been made from the earth to begin with. So if you want to know what those words are, they're the word ish and isha. It's like isha, ish and isha. If you said that really fast, it would be a bit of a tongue twister. But the beautiful thing about being made of the earth is that it reminds us that we are connected deeply to this planet and that our relation to it really matters. We live in a time and place where we're really disconnected from our bodies and from the earth. Not many of us are gardeners, I think, in this congregation, but are there any gardeners in here who use their hands? Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We're like crazy.
Yeah. So some of you know what it feels like to work the earth with your hands and almost the therapeutic aspect of being in the stillness of a garden and creating something beautiful. One of the things about gardening that we often struggle with remembering in our busy lives is that they can be places of stillness, but also places of beauty, and they can also be places of food justice, which is what we'll talk about later. So they're not just for us to enjoy, but they're also something that we have responsibility over in order to help those who need the help. And just for kicks and giggles, I found some fun art pieces about Adam and Eve to share with you all that are more non-traditional. So this one is a Byzantine mosaic of Adam and Eve. And Adam and Eve don't look very different in this one, which is why I picked it. I thought it really captured their connection and the way that they're related to each other. Often we see very different images of Adam and Eve. Usually they look like us. They look white in art. They don't look like they're from another part of the world. But I wanted to capture some of the aspects of Adam and Eve that we forget about. So, and this one is my favorite. This one is an Iranian portrayal of Adam and Eve. It's from the 12th century. It also reminds me that we often, when we try to imagine people or stories from the text of the Bible, we pick people who look like us because those are the people we can relate to, usually. And so I wanted to stretch our imaginations a little bit and to imagine Adam and Eve in a different way this morning.
He can't hear you, so I was giving him permission.
Am I being too quiet? Okay.
Yeah.
I will try to project more.
Everything's turned on.
Take it off.
Yeah.
I was going to give that.
When do you think that picture was made?
It was made in the 12th century. Yeah.
Lay that on the podium.
Okay. Is that better?
That's kind of a,
Okay.
microphone.
Sure. Okay.
I think
Can
it's
you hear me
interesting
better?
how these, Adam's foot is, the toes, against the staff that he's holding in his right hand.
Mm-hmm.
I can't quite understand.
Why?
There must be some significance to that. But
Mm-hmm.
I think her hair looks like snakes.
Her hair?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does a little bit look like snakes. Yeah.
you behave for all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. The rod may be hearkening to his dominion over creatures, Adam's dominion over creatures in the earth. But there isn't a direct symbol about the serpent in this depiction of Adam and Eve. But she is wearing anklets, which are interesting, and her hair, like you noted, Julie, does look like does look like snakes too, a little bit. Yeah. So I shared these all with you this morning just to stretch your imaginations a little bit and try to imagine Adam and Eve in a different time and place than our own. So some of the ones I found on Google were very funny and were not exactly how I imagined them in the story, but yeah. So one more piece this morning is something that's actually from a children's story. Have any of you heard of the Godly Play curriculum? It's a Montessori curriculum for children, and they tell Bible stories using this curriculum. It's an Episcopal curriculum that some churches use to tell the stories of the Bible in a new way, and they have a really cool telling of the creation story, and they talk about Adam being the word for everyone. So when the world is created, God created Adam, which means everyone. And I think that's such a beautiful reminder that we are connected at the root to the earth, that God created everyone to be connected to the earth, and that's part of who we are as the people of God. Another idea I wanted to share with you, it does have a big word that some of you probably have not heard before. It's the word pneumatology. Does anyone know what that means? Pneuma means spirit or breath, and tology means study. So pneumatology means the study of the Spirit. So, and it essentially means the study of the Holy Spirit. So I found this really interesting writer who talked about what it meant to have an earth pneumatology. So the spirit theology about the planet. And he talked about how the reasons we aren't as connected to our bodies and to the planet is that we've forgotten that the Holy Spirit is in everything, and that the earth is not an object for us to use, like something to consume, like we often do when we buy things at the store and throw them away when we're done. But the earth is something for us to cherish and to steward, and that we are in deep relationship with it, because it has been a gift, not an object. So that is what I have for you. And now Miss Holly is going to come forward and give us our second word for this morning.
Our second word is garden. So when I say garden, what pops into your mind?
Flowers.
Growing, flowers,
Vegetable dirt.
dirt,
Beauty.
beauty, weeds. You didn't ask for honesty. Nobody said be honest. Weeds. So most of us think of garden as a, what do you do about that? Just leave it? Clip. There, I didn't want my next slide. Okay. Most of us think about a place. A garden is a place. Some place we go designated often by a fence, especially if they're deer. Go, as in Fred and I went to Butchert Gardens at Christmas. It's a destination. Or we think of garden as a thing we do, a going or a doing. I garden, you garden, Michele gardens. So doing. And oftentimes those two go together. We go someplace and we garden. So what does the word mean in the Bible? Bible Hub, thank goodness for Google. Bible Hub says there are 68 places in the Bible where the word garden appears. And it depends on the translation. Oftentimes, there are places in the Bible that speak of Eden. They don't speak of garden. Everybody knows when the word is Eden, they mean garden. So last week, Bill gave us a nice little run-up about today, and he said that he knew about Revelations. Well, actually, in the 68, Revelations isn't mentioned. In the last chapter of Revelations, it says, and the healing of the leaves, I'm going to do that wrong. is for the healing, the leaves are for the healing of the earth. And that's a beautiful ending, using a garden, as Bill said, an urban garden, as a metaphor for what this whole book is about, as Michele said, from the very first to the very last pages. With all of those 68 places, where do you begin? And I'm going to do, as Michele has done, begin at the beginning. We have the beginning has a very different take on garden. It is not a destination, and it is not a verb. It is place. Not a place, because there is no be place. It is place. Maybe I was trying to think of a synonym, maybe home, or all it is, or everything I know. But that's garden is not some destination. And it comes with two relationships. The first relationship is that of lover to loved. God is the lover, and the humans are that which is loved. So that's the first relationship. I gotta remember when to click my clicker here. So that which created us saw that it was good. And nothing in the Genesis story makes me feel that God is going, look at what I just did. It's more of a, wow, I like it. The second relationship was between the human and the dirt, as Michele has beautifully explained. It is all ours to keep and to till. Now, some authors, given that this word has been examined for 6,000 years, some authors say that till involves, has an implication of a slave relationship. So Patricia Tull, and that's her, speaking at a conference in Montreat last September, Patricia Tull translates that passage. Oh, and that's her book, Inhabiting Eden. She translates that till and serve as till and keep as serve and preserve. And she can do that because she is Professor Emeritus of Old Testament at Louisville Seminary, and she's a language scholar. So she says that it's good enough for me. So hold on to that, serve and preserve. I'm going to come back to it. One might speculate that humans were created last, and I was brought up believing that we were created last because it was saving the best till last. What if God waited until God had created everything? Everything was in place, and then on that last day, which kind of puts the two creation stories together, He's got it. He knows that there's one last thing that needs to be made, and that is something to care for what she has crafted out of the void. So God needs the perfect material and reaches down and picks up that precious, precious part that undergirds every single piece of what has happened in these 6 days. Well, by doing that, he gives this one creature a special link to the soil. And from that connection to the soil, humans can then assure that every living thing would have the sustenance that they need for this gift of life. That's a bit of a take, a flip. So we all know that things went south very quickly. And I want to tell you about a story about a professor, I think he was at MIT. He came up with, he found a way to make human beings. So he called God up and he said, let's get together. You know, I've got mine, you've got yours. Let's have a contest and just see who can do it best. And God said, well, why not? Let's pick a day. So they picked a day, and there they were. And so somebody said, let's begin. And the professor reached down and he picked up some dirt. And God said, no. you've got to make your own dirt. So, back to the 68 references. I dropped your watch. Some of them, no, let me go. I missed a sentence here. I'm struck by how many of the 68 references use garden imagery as a comparison. Once again, establishing a relationship between the humans and the garden. So Isaiah 1 has this verse, which compares us to an oak that fades away or a garden without water. And Isaiah 58, and the Lord will continually guide you, and you'll be like a watered garden. One of the garden stories that particularly catches my attention is the one about King Ahab. If you'll recall, King Ahab, who's married to Jezebel, that wicked creature, is taking a stroll one day, and he sees a garden that he likes, and decides he wants to grow some veggies in that spot. So he contacts the owner, who is Naboth, and says, hey, you know what, I'm willing. This is right close to my front door, and this is what I want. And Naboth says in verse 3, which is the whole story, and it hinges on the whole story, the Lord forbid that I should give you my ancestral inheritance. Ahab is a person like us. A garden is a destination. It is a place you go, and then you do something in it. And that is the sin of all of this. Naboth understands garden as place. It's not a place, it is place. And it connects him by this inheritance all the way back to that first story where God reached down and crafted us out of the soil. Unfortunately, that text gets taught a lot as a lesson about don't take somebody's land, because Ahab goes into a big pout, he won't eat, Jezebel gets angry, she says, I'll fix this, she has Naboth killed, and it cost her her life. But that really is, to people who were hearing this story back in the time that the first king's version of this, they would have understood that this is a story about don't take away that connection, that piece of us that is a piece of all that is. So now I'd like to, this is where here's the disclaimer, if you don't like to see ugly things, leave now. I'd like us to check in and see how we're doing here on Eden. This is a photo of the Alberta Tar Sands. I had heard that you could see this from outer space, so I got on Google and I pulled up photos thinking that this is the largest open pit mine. And this is the dump that's one, I'm sure it's one of many, but a dump that's there at the tar sands.
And this is where Alberta is?
Alberta, sorry, thank you, yeah, Alberta. What I found is that this is the Bingham Canyon copper mine in Utah. And if you own anything, probably everything I have brought to the room today has some bit of this copper mine in it. But if it were a stadium, it would seat 9 million people. The thing about largest open pit mine is that there are many definitions of that. So there are 10 contenders for that first place, depending on how wide it is. This one wins because it's the deepest. Or maybe there's some that just win because they're the ugliest. I don't know. And then there is this one. This is a German machine. It has a bucket on it that holds 13,500 tons. And it's the largest land vehicle in the world. The bagger, 288, it's probably a 286, can excavate 240,000 tons of coal or ground a day. It's 721 feet long and it's 281 feet high, and these are people. Now it's a bit of a segue, but you can't have a garden if you don't have water. So do any of you know what a gyre is? I knew it would be a use person. Yes. A gyre is a place where gently swirling currents, because of the Coriolis effect, bring things together. And we're most familiar with the gyre because we see that when they look down on a hurricane and they're showing you the big swirling cloud. That's the Coriolis effect. I was a stewardess for Pan Am, and so I had a lot of flights down to South America, and I had heard that if you pull the plug in the bathtub, if you're in the northern hemisphere, the water goes one way, and if you pull the plug in the southern hemisphere, it goes the other way. Well,
True.
so much. First of all, I forget which way does it go when I'm So these gyres, there are 5 large ones, and we have our very own Pacific gyre. It has 7 million tons of stuff in it, almost all of which are plastic. It is twice the size of Texas, and it's 9 feet deep. That's one. It isn't the biggest, by the way. So, and that plastic, by the way, comes from things that run down our drains. Things that slip out of the car and end up in the ditch, that ends up in the river, that ends up in the ocean. Puget Sound, all of these things come together in these gently swirling gyres. We heard a story in Alaska about somebody who went to a gyre that's not even pictured here, but it swirls right here. Picked up a container, shifted it out. The sticks in it to build a house. And so they built this beautiful 2-story house out of what they found in the container. So this is my favorite gyre photo. It's not a real clear photo, but you'll get the idea. Paul Allen, our own dear Paul Allen, does all sorts of interesting things, and one of them was funding a study on gyres, which created an exhibit, and we got to see that exhibit in the Anchorage Museum. And this was a piece that would fill this wall. It was a huge piece of artwork. Can anybody tell me what this is? It's a photo. What this photo is?
Flip-flops.
Flip-flops. Flip-flops. These are all flip-flops. Collected. It was interesting because the exhibit had collected there were a wall of different kinds of dolls and spools of thread, and just random things that they had pulled out to emphasize the craziness of what ends up in these gyres. So enough of the bad news. I'm suggesting that the creation stories in Genesis give us a very tender story, a connectional story of us to God and us to God's creation, with our playing a major part in serving and preserving that we are not, that the dominion that we have is in getting to say how we serve and preserve. And so the Bagger 288 kind of, for me, symbolizes a different approach to how we're serving and preserving. Many of the biblical references to gardens allude to a place that is sacred and that provides a reconnection to the relationship that's given in that creation story. So I would like to leave the word garden with us pondering how Jesus chose a garden to reconnect on the night of his betrayal. And now the commandments. We've got Adam, Adamah, Ish, and Ishta. Is that right? It's been a long time since I took Hebrew. That tell us who we are. We are from the soil, and garden tells us where we live and what it's like in this place where we live. But now we have a commandment: feed my sheep. So, for 10 years, I ranched in West Texas. We had around 2,000 sheep, and on a good year, we had around 4,000 lambs. In West Texas, there was a saying, a sheep is born looking for a place to die. I have rounded up, vaccinated, and neutered thousands of lambs. And so this commandment really tugs at me. I did not find sheep easy to feed. One year I found 2 little doggy lambs in the pasture, and it wasn't ever good to go and pick up a lamb. The mother may have gone over the rise, and I might not have seen the mother, but we watched all day long. And nobody came back to these two lambs, so I took them home. And I fed them, and of course I fell in love with them. But the agreement was that on the day we took the lambs to market, that they would be included. And I knew that. You live on a ranch, it goes with the territory. The day before they were to go to market, they both died. And even though I had an immense amount of money in these 2 critters, I still took them to the vet and had the vet tell me why. And he said it was an E. coli. I had put them in a small garden, and they were grazing over their own feces, and that had caused them that. So they're hard to raise, and if they are born and they don't get the first mother's milk, the colostrum, it's very unlikely that they'll live to adulthood. So there were some hard lessons there, and it gave me a real appreciation for how tenuous the chances are of survival. Psalms 23 gives us a model for the shepherd. And I think that the model is, the Lord is my shepherd, but then later when Jesus says, feed my sheep, I think he's referring back to this model of Psalm 23, where we are held and nurtured and loved, and that our job is to carry this forward. So this isn't, could you resist? They're so cute. This isn't the ranch I was on. We didn't have that many hills, but it looked a lot like that. And this isn't me, but by gum, I have been on the holding ends of buckets. But feeding is an industry. It involves lots of science. Almost all of the meat that we eat comes from a concentrated animal feeding operation. Science and efficiency have buffered us from the deep understanding that we are humans made of humus and connected to all that is. Pigs are a special case because they're not allowed to stand when they give birth, and they are not allowed to suckle when their babies are born. They are kept prone on the ground, and these are the hogs that are allowed to stand. So there are other ways to feed sheep. Is that precious? And that brings us to, ta-da! This isn't your garden. So here we are with a commandment to feed my sheep. We know who we are. We are an earth people. We know that this is garden. We have our own special piece of Eden right here. And so right here is where we are going to begin the garden that we are going to use for the purpose of feeding sheep. And this is the layout for the garden. So going back, you know where the posts are down there, that little spot. This is where the posts are, and the gate, and then 3 raised beds here and 4 here, with feature in between. And now back to Michele.
So this is the garden layout that some of you know has been gifted to us by one of our neighbors across the way, Heidi Schmitten. She's an architect and she designed this for us as a free will offering to the congregation.
What did she gift?
She gifted this design.
Okay.
She's an
I
architect.
wanted to be
Yeah,
clear. She didn't gift
The property.
the property.
Oh
The
no,
property is
no,
ours.
the property is yes, the property is ours. But they are the neighbors who park on the side, and they have 3 kids, and they play they play on the property, and this is like their second backyard. So they were thrilled to be part of this project with us. So we've also been in conversation with Seattle Tilth, and we have their program manager here today from the Faith and Food program. His name is Derek Farmer. He's right over here. And they have been helpful in our process as we have been dreaming about the garden. And we are also hosting a garden planning session at the end of April and at the beginning of May. So those will be 2 Wednesday nights, April 20th and 27th, and then a Saturday, May 7th. So, and that's for everyone to attend, whether or not you have a brown thumb or a green thumb or somewhere in between. We need all kinds of ideas and creative thinkers and gardeners to join us for those conversations about the way the garden will be part of worship and the way it will be part of our life of service as a community. So if you want to know more about that, you can talk to me or to Holly. But I'd like to turn the floor over to Derek Farmer so he can introduce himself to you and then talk about what they do. Yeah. Yes.
Well, hello. My name is Derek Farmer. I work for Seattle Tilth, which is a nonprofit based in Wallingford over in Seattle that aims to support and expand a more equitable and sustainable food system in King County. I manage a program called Just Garden. The bigger part of our program is that we use volunteers to build raised bed vegetable gardens for low-income families around King County in their backyards. But we also build with apartment buildings, transitional housing, schools, food banks, and houses of worship. And in fact, we've just started something called our Food and Faith Initiative that aims to support houses of worship like yours in building gardens to support food banks and meal programs in King County. So I'm going to be facilitating, or at least in part facilitating, this series of workshops coming up in April and May. And the crux of it really is twofold. One, we're going to be figuring out exactly what the mission of the garden is going to be. Just growing food is wonderful, but we have to figure out exactly who are we supporting, what problems are we trying to solve, how are we going to know if we've solved them, what are we going to measure to make sure that we're successful, all the sort of things that go into a truly successful project. But then the part that I think is maybe resonates more and is more exciting for me personally is figuring out where this garden is going to fit into the worship life of this congregation. It's easy to start a garden and it ends up being the side project of a couple people, like Holly and Michele, off to the side that nobody really pays attention to. And that is exactly what we want to avoid, right? So ideally, we wouldn't just have those of you who are interested in digging in the dirt come to these workshops. We would also have people from every different aspect of the congregation's life. So someone from the worship and liturgy committee, someone from hospitality, someone from outreach and missions, your pastor, someone from every different aspect of the congregational life. And one of the things that we're going to do is we're going to look at all of the different liturgical cycles that go into the congregational life. So we'll look at an average Sunday and the liturgy that you go through both in the worship space and here. We'll look at the monthly cycle that you have for Christian education and different dinners that you put on and whatever else you do. And then we'll look at the entire liturgical year. And together we'll try to find different ways to integrate the garden into that into the worship life of your congregation. So an easy example would be, do you have communion once a month? So once a month on Communion Sundays, At the point of the presentation of the gifts, when the bread and the wine and the grape juice are brought out, along with the monetary gifts, what if you scheduled a harvest the night before and you actually brought up fruits and vegetables to be laid before the altar and blessed before they're then donated? Things like that. Most of our liturgical holidays throughout the year have an agricultural basis, in the deep past. And so we'll talk a lot about ways to recover and rediscover some of those agricultural roots and find ways to slot in the garden throughout those. So I'm really excited. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I do hope to see all of you there. And if anybody has any questions, I'll be around.
Okay. Thank you, Derek. Thank you, Derek. Well, we are very excited to have him here and to start this project. And in a few weeks, Polly and I will be hosting a short lunch after the second service down in the youth room to talk about any questions you have based on today's presentation, as well as garden ideas, and to motivate all of us as we begin the creative process over the next few months. So please join us for that. It'll be, what? Yes. So please join us for that and let us know if you can come. And I wanted to close with this quote. Every decision we make about food is a vote for the kind of world we want to live in. So not just the food we grow, but the food we buy and the farmers we support. It all impacts the kind of world that we're choosing to be part of.
What days are the meetings?
The meeting in 2 weeks will be on February 14th.
Okay.
So if you want to come to lunch with us, it'll be on the 14th at 12:15 after the second service down in the youth room.
Bring your Valentine.
Yeah.
I have to find a priority.
And the garden planning dates are April 20th and 27th. Those are Wednesday evenings from 6:30 to 8:30. And then the Saturday planning day will be May 7th, the day before Mother's Day. And it will be from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So, and look for more info in the newsletters and via email. And Polly and I will inundate you with more information.